you may have wondered when you took a look at my little vest, what is going on here? And I love when I can't necessarily figure it out right away. So I want to show you how to do this stitching, which I've also used on some of the seams on this little vest. So this again is something I learned from French Ready to Wear, and it is a very, very cool trick. Please, before you put this in a garment, make a couple of test samples so you're comfortable with the technique. I'm still going to use my 1/4 inch foot here because it's open and I can really see where I'm going to be stitching. And I'm using a small stitch because, you know, that's one of the tricks of sewing in circles is a small stitch gives you a smoother curved line. And I'll stop every so often and reposition myself. And once again, I'm sewing with a light color thread and I'm stitching right inside that first stitching line. You can see how beautifully that little glued down seam allowance is holding. Look, Ma, no pins. So there's no pins in here at all. They're not necessary. I love that 505 spray. Sulky makes a good product too. I found the 505 spray first, so that's kind of the one I tend to use, but I've used others and they all work nicely. So you can see I'm working just a little section at a time. The thing you'll notice is that I kind of futzed with this to make sure it was all lined up before I started sewing. The success of the sewing really depends on all the other factors. Now, the original French one I saw wasn't this tidy, and I couldn't really figure out how they did it. So this is my interpretation of the Cadillac 300 € little t-shirt, which today translates to $450. But you know, they had to pay some person to cut those artfully placed holes in the sweater in a little cotton knit like this. So let's see how it looks. Oh, it's beautiful. All that light colored stitching went away. It's slightly imperfect, but I can live with that. And what I do here is I go over to the ironing board and press it, and then back to my design table, to my rotary cutter, and trim away the excess. So I just have a little 1/4 inch seam allowance, and voila, you are done. Now we are going to do the Holey Moley technique again, this time using a stitch to get that kind of railroad tie effect. So here's how to do it. I've put on my #1 stitch because I'm going to use a zigzag, and I love this machine because it has a super wide zigzag. And then you want to play with the stitch length that you want for your effect, but I'm going to go with about a 4.5 on this machine. So this is a wide, rather long zigzag. The other thing you want to experiment with is loosening the tension a little bit. So my tension is usually at 4. I'm just taking it down to about 2. So this is why you need to make a sample and see how it works. So once again, it's the same technique as you use with a straight stitch, only with a slight variation. So what we're going to do is on this foot, it has a little line that I am going to position, line on the foot, just inside my stitching line. And I may wander, but that's my goal. And what you do is, we're doing the zigzag stitch. I'm going to lengthen it even a little bit more. So all the way around, we're stitching this with a big zigzag stitch. Now, I never realized that I could sew a primary seam with a zigzag stitch, but this was a very wonderful aha moment when I realized what some clever French person had figured out. This was not my idea. I saw it on a garment that I purchased, and I have been playing with it. Now they weren't sewing the hole using the stitch. That was my idea. I thought, well, try that. That could be kind of fun. It adds just a little bit of texture, and what I find what you want to play with is your thread color. So this is a great way to introduce another color into a plain garment. And again, you're going to want to make some samples so that you can see how long to make the zigzag, what color thread. You might want to use a little heavier thread, or some of the fabulous, little heavier variegated threads that quilters use. So now we're coming around the circle again, and I'm going to straighten things out and just do a little securing stitch so that it doesn't fall apart. And ideally, I would do that right inside the stitching line. I'm not sure how that worked. So now, what you do is you thonk it. So you do, see how if I pull on it a little bit, the fact that I loosened the tension allows you to do that. And you get this really lovely contrast of a little bit of thread, and people will ask you, how did you do that? And it's so wonderfully simple. Yeah. So here are some of my little experiments taking this to another level. One is just to use the decorative stitches. So here I just use a decorative stitch and again loosen the tension, and look what happens. See how you kind of get a pattern in the seam? And then I tried it with this stitch, and that was the result. So that kind of gave me a longer length between the railroad stitches. Those just look like little dots in the seam. And then I played around with doing like an enclosed seam, and it works there too. So this would be like around the edge of a collar or a facing. And here I just used, now when I was making this sample, I was a little insecure. So I first did a stitching line and then the zigzag a little bit on the outside of it. So if your fabric ravels, this is a pretty ravelly fabric, that'll keep things in control from raveling while you're wearing it. But it's the combination, see, of loosening the tension and then pulling on it a little bit. And then you can, favor it to one side or another. And I've played with, this was my sample for my vest. Could I do it with just a seam? What I'm finding that I like is to do this stitching, do the thonking part, that's now a sewing term, and then press it, and then I would, I sew it, serge it, and then I thonk it. So you get a nice finished seam, and it's all secure, and it's fast, it's easy, and it's really a great look.